Welcome back to Mingus on Tech. I'm Ken Mingus, Executive Editor at Computer World. Today's Expert Edition, we've got Apple expert Mike Dagonia, Android expert and blogger J.R. Raphael. We're going to decide definitively which is better, iOS or Android. Maybe. Stick around.
Yeah, we're going to settle that argument.
We'll see.
Okay, so when you've got two experts in the house, you got to get them together and have them fight this thing out.
That's right.
So, experts here. Long-running debate, iOS versus Android, which is better, which is more popular, which is more secure, which is more private. And you guys are going to help me figure that out, or at least tell me why from Android side or Apple side you like what you like. Let's start since today happens to be the day that iOS 11 is coming out. We know that Oreo just came out in August. So we've got two fairly fresh versions of our mobile operating systems floating around out there. Why, or let's look at it this way. What's the best way for a company to roll out mobile operating system updates? The way Android does it, with the fragmentation, the way Apple does it, with everything locked down, and why? Who wants to go first?
Well, that was a loaded question.
Yes, it
the way
was.
Android does
Well,
it with the fragmentation.
We should note that in the background that the videographers have put together an Apple store with sheep in front of it to taunt Mike and I, because we do tend to be Apple fans. I wanted to make sure that JR did not feel that he was outnumbered. So
thank you.
I'm playing neutral arbiter here. Okay, anyway, back. So seriously, I mean, obviously one of the issues with Android that has come up is the fact that because of the way carriers roll out the updates, no matter what Google does, sometimes people get these updates months after they've arrived.
If at all.
If at all. Seriously.
Yeah.
So is that a good way to do things? Is it the only way that Google could do it?
I think from a consumer's perspective, it's hard to argue that the Apple way is more effective and more desirable. But that being said, as Ken and I were talking about in the previous Mingus on Tech episode, you can have that kind of streamlined instant update, one company controlling it sort of experience. With Android, you just have to choose the phone that provides that, which
Like
would be
the Nexus or the Pixel.
Exactly, Google's own phone. So those are kind of the equivalent of the holistic one company doing the hardware, the software, the upgrades, everything. And if you have a Nexus or a Pixel phone, you are going to get an update within, if not days, the first few weeks, depending on how they roll it out.
However, if you go with anybody else, you're absolutely subject to all sorts of limitations and hoops that you need to jump through. And, oftentimes these devices just get abandoned after they're released. And that's the situation that you find yourself with Android. With Apple, you're going to get regular updates. You're going to get major feature updates, and it's going to be consistent. And, that includes security patches, that includes feature updates too. And it's something you can pretty much, set your time to. So, I mean, like today, they're releasing iOS 11. And let's see, most devices that are out there support that, and can be upgraded to. And again, it's hard to duplicate on the Android side.
One of the things that has surprised me, and we have talked about this as an issue, in terms of how quickly devices get updated, is that there are so many Android users who are still, 1, 2, 3 generations back. It does seem like the way Apple does it, it gets most of the devices that can be updated within a month or two. I think it's like 70% are up to the latest.
As a matter of fact, the numbers on iOS 10 were 89%. That's a significant number.
Okay.
And not only that, but iOS 9 was at 9%. So, I mean, you have almost 97% of your users on at least the latest, on the latest, and then at least the last year's update. And that's pretty significant, especially if you're a developer looking to make their own apps, make apps for that specific platform. It's like, what do you go with? Android, which is fragmented. We all know that. And it's like, even then, which version do you choose? Or Apple, where you get to choose either the latest operating system or last year's model, knowing full well you're going to get a large chunk of the audience.
Yeah, I don't know that from a developer's perspective it's as extreme. I'm not a developer. I'll put that out there.
Yeah.
But from interviewing and talking with developers, there is the frustration of if I target, whatever new API that or feature that comes out in Android O, then I know that's only going to reach a small percentage of people for a while. But it's created in a way that you're not going to be excluding everybody else. You can still develop in a way that's there. But yeah, there's no denying that that's kind of a negative point from that perspective for Android. It's also a trade-off, though, because the truth is you get the flip side of that is you get the diversity. So if I want to go buy a phone today, I don't have to buy, this iPhone or that iPhone. I can pick from dozens, thousands, basically.
But that diversity makes it super difficult to develop for. For instance, from the Android website today, the developer site, Nougat is on 15.8%, and it's even then split into 2 versions. Marshmallow is at 32.2%. Lollipop has 28.8, and that's the combined because there's multiple versions of Lollipop.
Right. There's an incremental 0.1 kind of deal, yeah.
And then KitKat is at 15.1%. So that still leaves out 8 to 10% of users on even older versions. And then, when you're a developer, you have to consider the screen size and you have to the device, what supports. I mean, they even have OpenGL support based on they even have charts on OpenGL support, which are divvied up. I mean, we're talking about version 2 of OpenGL is on 37.3%, version 3 is on 45.8%, and version 3.1, the latest, is on 16.9%, which if you're a developer, again, which device do you target? Which version of OpenGL? I mean, it's just a lot of complications.
I think if you're a developer, that's an issue, but if you're an end user,
no, as an end user, you're just going to take
most people. I think
most people don't know what
the vast majority, unless you're jonesing,
which is also problematic.
Sure, in its own way.
Unless you're really jonesing though for you've got to have your updates right now, and there is a hardware solution for that, which is the Google devices. So you're going to get it up to date. Unless you really care about that, then the issue. I mean, clearly Android is doing quite well in the marketplace. I mean, it far outnumbers iOS devices.
Oh, absolutely.
So this issue of the fragmentation, while it definitely an issue for developers, potentially an issue for security and also enterprises because they have to manage these various iterations of Android. Clearly, Google's doing something right with it.
Well, you can get, a free Android phone in cereal boxes these days. I mean, they're just...
Are they coming out with those now?
I think
the Captain Crunch phone. I've been wanting one of those.
He gets it.
I need some of those. Yeah, and I think what you were saying, Ken, is also, again, going back to the flip side of that there may be more effort in supporting an app, but the payoff is you're reaching, I mean, I don't have the latest
hundreds
stats,
of
but
millions,
we all know
billions, whatever
it's a
the number is.
huge chunk of the pie compared to iOS, globally being a relatively small chunk. So you are reaching a lot of users. While we have to do a little more work to support.
But we're looking at, is Nougat at 15.8% or is Marshmallow at 32%, even as large as the iOS market, which is on iOS 9 or iOS 10 or after today, iOS 11. So it's like that's
who
the
can
numbers.
do the math in their head right now?
I'm not.
That would be an
I went into
question.
words.
I'm
not doing the numbers.
Right. Yeah, agreed. And that's just, I'm just throwing that out there.
No, that's an interesting point. But I don't know that there are any apps that are exclusively target, like this app is for Oreo. You really don't see that kind of thing. I mean, it might be X feature will only work on phones with Android, X.0 or higher, but you don't really see an app that's incompatible unless you're talking about a phone, somebody has a phone that hasn't been updated that's from like 7 years ago or whatnot.
Right.
Sure.
Well,
but
at that point, who cares?
Right. Exactly. Most any app you're going to find is going to work with any reasonably recent phone. So in the real world, it's not as much of an issue. But yeah, I mean, there's no denying that from a user's perspective, from a user who cares perspective.
Okay, so we can confirm there is fragmentation on the Android side.
Yeah,
we know that.
In the field of updates, it goes to Apple. I'm not going to fight it because there's no denying it. Yeah, there is.
Well, sliding into a slightly different topic because this comes up too. The idea of Android versus iOS and security. And Apple has the reputation because it has things locked down that it's easier to manage in the workplace. I'm not sure. Is it?
Well, let's just get this out in the open right now. I mean, no device is 100% secure.
Yep.
That's just fact, right? And not only that, but which is more secure kind of shifts on a day-to-day basis depending on the latest exploit.
What malware is out there?
Right.
Yeah.
So that being said, every researcher I've spoken to or every article I've written on the subject, they've all said that iOS has the advantage here as well, simply because of the closed system, simply because of Apple's policies, simply because there's less to worry about. And not only that, the devices get updated. much more frequently, or at least, again, you know, iOS 10 is on 89% of the devices, regardless of age. And that's significant, especially, you know, staying current is a huge security, it's a huge security stuff. You just have to do it. You have to stay current. Yeah. And if your devices are abandoned, you know, not even, not worth being updated because, you know, they were gotten from a cereal box.
You know? But they have good flavor. If you lick the outside of it, it's fruity. I mean, it's delicious.
Well, that's why they go with the name, you know?
Right. So, I mean, so again, it depends on a per day basis, but I think that we can agree that iOS has the edge here, you know, and again, depending on the day, the amount of edge, you know, kind of grows or shrinks.
Can we agree with that? Well, what do you think? Because we've talked about this in the past, and it's actually not quite as clear-cut as it might seem.
Right, exactly. The Android security picture isn't as black and white as it seems, and as most people will paint it to be. Even if you read, you know, most media reports on the latest threat.
Right.
Some company comes out with a really catchy name, and you know, however many millions or billions of phones could be affected, and you start looking at it, and you realize first, this company sells some sort of antivirus software or solution for enterprises.
Right. There's always a
little
angle.
catch, and then you read it more closely, and then you realize that any phone that's been updated with the latest Google Play services couldn't be affected, and that goes back to another point that Android security. While the updates are what they are, Google has taken steps over the years to kind of mitigate that and break it down. So OS updates themselves aren't
it's definitely getting
important.
better. Android's definitely getting better.
Yeah, and the OS updates themselves aren't everything. Google also does monthly security patches, which those two, some manufacturers are better than others about rolling them out. But then on top of that, Google's pulled out a lot of pieces from the operating system over the years.
Yeah, I thought that was an important point. You made that one of the shows we had a month or so ago about it, pulling it and embedding the security in different places so that it's not an all or nothing sort of update.
Right, exactly. And some of it's user-facing stuff. Like, you know, when you see an iOS update, there are updates to the Mail app and the Calendar app. Well, those are all updated piecemeal throughout the year. You know, I might get an update on those twice a month on Android. But then there's also the security elements like Google Play services, which I mentioned. That's something most normal people would never see or know about. It's a utility that lives on your phone and is updated through the Play Store in the background. That handles a lot of security features, privacy features. So, I mean, again, you're not going to get, you do want a full OS update. You do want every security patch. There are elements that are important in all of those, but Google is doing, within this system it's created, this kind of jungle of, you know, the open source.
And that's it. It is a jungle.
It is.
And that's the problem. I mean, even in 2015, Mobile Report said that 97% of malware was written for Google device. I mean, Android devices. Yeah. And not only that, but I mean, they don't really take care of their store or
is that not also but you're going after the biggest target because Android is so
the same way with the Windows Mac
but it depends. It depends on the version. You know, you can't necessarily say that just because Android as a whole has more devices than iOS devices. They're all fragmented by different versions. So it depends because you know, the latest version of Google can have all the security patches. But, you know, the phone you get from the cereal box, you know, has been abandoned, doesn't get any of those security patches.
I want this mythical cereal box phone. I want one.
But do you know what I mean? So it depends on the situation, you know.
Now,
but
there also are still multiple layers beyond that, though.
Agreed.
Where, and again, this is how
we're
Google
definitely
has
trying
evolved.
to simplify it, so I agree.
Yeah, but, you know, Google has evolved beyond just the different pieces of the update to where there are different parts of the system, for instance. And as you said, no device is perfect. You'll see the occasional thing that gets through this. But there is scanning on the Play Store level. There is ongoing scanning on the device level.
That's crazy. I think it's I personally think it's crazy that you need a virus scanner on a telephone.
Well,
imagine a virus scanner
but
on a microwave or something like that. I mean, these things are just...
You know what? That microwave goes bad. It's going to be ugly.
That's true. That's true. I've never thought of it as a virus scanner. I guess you could say that. I don't think it works the way it would on like a Windows system,
agreed.
But it's just looking to make sure there are no problematic elements of an app. So if I download an app, a lot of these things come from people downloading apps from hypothetical third-party stores in you know, China that nobody,
which is also problematic.
Sure, but when you say malware being written for Android, the difference is malware being written for Android and malware actually affecting real users in the real world. Which the truth is, with the occasional rare exception, is something you very, very rarely do hear about.
Let's see. According to Symantec's
Oh, you got
Internet
more stats.
Security
See, he
Threat
came
Report,
He's got his
He
statistics.
came
I got my
prepared.
stats. Basically issued in
Stayed up
April.
all night doing this.
Oh, you have no idea. The Symantec Internet Security Report issued in April has, let me see, 18.4 million mobile malware detections, and that's increasing every year.
And Symantec certainly has no reason to be touting figures like that.
Oh
I'm
no,
sure.
I completely agree with you. But you know, there's certain things that Apple has been doing for a while. You know, including the full device encryption, the Touch ID with a secure enclave. You know, there's a lot of tech that Apple kind of, and not only that, they have more granular privacy controls. You know,
Let's talk about privacy. Okay, so I think we can say, nothing's totally secure. Security's handled on the iOS side differently because of the closed system than it is on Android.
Yep.
That some of the issues that may have affected Android in the past, Google and
Oh, they're
app
actively
developers are
working to-
obviously
right.
working on it.
Right.
And keeping in mind real world versus theoretical.
Right.
How many people are really affected?
Right.
The stage fright vulnerability that came to light in 2015, as an example, affected 95% of all devices using all variants of Android.
Affected in what way?
As in, made the stage fright vulnerability made those devices insecure or susceptible to attacks from that specific bit of software.
I'd again be interested to know how many were actually impacted, though, between, because I know that was a high profile one and there were patches deployed and
Right.
et cetera, et
Right.
cetera. But
The
I'd be
patches
curious to know
deployed
how
for
many
a
were.
lot of phones, but not all of them, which is again problematic.
Sure,
sure. But I agree. How much was actually exploited in the real world? I didn't
Right.
affect that. I didn't look at that number because it might have affected my point. So I stayed clear from that.
Right.
However,
Okay. Fair and balanced.
Right.
Yeah.
Right,
Okay.
However, from everything I've read, if you're not using a Nexus or a Pixel device, you're pretty much
Which if I
it's a
was
crapshoot.
if I was doing Android, that's what I would be doing.
Yeah,
Agreed.
and I've written
Agreed.
more
I
times
want
than
the-
I can
I want
count
the
that
pure
the only devices I would wholeheartedly recommend for people are those for,
Yeah.
for a number
Right.
of
For
reasons, but
Agreed.
including
I want the latest and greatest, and it's likely to be the most secure.
Yeah,
Right.
and there's something to be said for the kind of holistic user experience that comes along with
Right.
it too.
Right.
So-
It's
Agreed.
a clean
Yeah,
experience.
it's good when the same company makes the same hardware and the same software, right?
Yes.
I don't know that I think the
well.
making necessarily has to be there because the Nexus phones in the past Google didn't make. They had a
Gotcha.
hand in, but at least
Right, but
controls
they
to some degree. Yeah.
right, they had-
there
they
was
had-
something valuable to that.
Yeah.
And when you look at it from a broader perspective, it makes sense why Google went the direction it did. If Google came out in whatever year it was, way back when Android first was coming onto the scene, and they
0506.
I think it's around when they bought it and started
Yeah,
working
yeah.
on it. If they bought this little startup called Android, and that was right around the time the iPhone was about to take off, and then
Right.
subsequently
So
did.
seven.
And they said, "Hey, we're going to make our own phone too. Check it out." And they came out with one phone. It probably wouldn't have gone anywhere. I mean,
Right.
you never know. But what made Android work was the fact that they made it open, that any carrier, any manufacturer could come in and do it.
And it was
yeah,
better
but
than
that's-
anything the carriers were doing at the time.
Right, agreed.
Clearly. I mean,
Agreed.
beyond belief, anything better.
But the reason they gave away the software was because that's how they make their money. They
Sure,
track
of course.
everything
Well,
you
let's
do.
talk about privacy
Right.
and how the two operating systems compares or stack up, because that's I mean, one of the concerns I would have with Android or with Google in general would be how closely are they keeping my my data secure?
It's always a trade-off with privacy. You're getting
Yeah.
features in exchange for the
Right.
data.
Well,
that
it's a
they're collecting.
trade-off on the Android side because you really have to look at. It comes down to how is this company making money?
Of
you
course.
know?
It's always
So-
important to know.
So Apple makes money off the hardware, which is all premium priced. We know this.
How well I know.
And yeah,
I'm about to find out.
and Google makes their money off services.
Right,
It's that
they make
simple.
money off of selling ads. Ultimately, they get you to use the internet more,
Right.
and if you have great services, you're going to use the internet more. They're going to sell. I mean, ultimately, it all comes down to selling ads, and that's important to know.
And what they're doing
Yeah.
is they're grabbing all that data, they're grabbing your habits, they're doing all that stuff, and I guess they're anonymizing it as well. But then they're selling it to the highest bidder, and that's that sort of privacy has some issues where Apple has actually come out and they said specifically our users deserve privacy. They just deserve it, and we're going to give it to them.
But
they've
then you
stood
get
up.
the inferior services in terms of would either of you guys contend that Siri is good?
No.
I
or in
use
terms
Siri.
of
I use Siri. I use Siri all the time, but I wish it was better.
I would contend that
Right.
Siri is
You're right.
half-baked. It's
by not
useful.
knowing as much about you, it's
Right.
not as able to deliver.
Agreed.
Again, that's what
Agreed.
I'm talking about
That's
with
the
the
trade-off.
trade-off.
Fair.
So, and if you're not comfortable
That's a
with
good-
that on
that's
an
a
Android
good
phone,
specific-
you can uncheck every one of those toggles. You're just going to get a much more limited experience that most people wouldn't like. So,
Agreed.
For me, the information it collects has never been problematic. I don't really care if there's, anonymous data that an advertiser knows what websites I visit. It's the same thing when you're using Google on the internet. You're using, if you use Gmail, even if let's say you don't have a cell phone, or this was back before you use Gmail, you know that, well, actually, I think Gmail stopped displaying ads. But when Gmail was displaying ads, that you were getting that webmail service that was, above and beyond what anything else was out there. And you were getting that in exchange for the fact that Google would be able to show you more targeted ads when you go throughout other web
Personally,
pages.
I would rather have a more targeted ad, even if it does mean that some of my surfing happen. Because, I mean, really, why show me like baby diapers, which is something I'm not interested in, or something esoteric? Show me cars or technology or whatever. I don't have a problem with the trade-off there. I really don't.
Yeah.
But.
Well, some people might have...
Or maybe I do. Tell me, Mike.
Mike does.
Some people might have issues with the fact that is how they make their money.
You are the product. I do get that.
That is exactly it. And some people may have an issue with it because Google has a history of being adverse to user privacy. It's that simple. I mean, that's just their track record. Remember they were caught harvesting data from open Wi-Fi networks? Who goes around just collecting data from open Wi-Fi networks without permission? Then Google Buzz, they had your Gmail contacts out in the public by default. It's like just not little things, but things like that is hostile to the end users. So maybe you don't care, but I'm sure a lot of people do.
I think, again, we've got to get to practical versus realistic. I mean, no one's going to defend Google Buzz. No one at Google is going to defend Google Buzz. I mean, that was just one of those things that kind of, there were problems and all that. But in the real world of using an Android phone, there's never been an instance where I felt that my data is compromised. It's not that my personal emails or text messages or what have you are being posted online or sent to advertisers. We're talking about the kind of data that can be used to better target ads and then also thus improve services. And again, if you're not comfortable with it, you uncheck that box. You don't have to let your phone track your location and know where you are. You don't have to let any of that happen. It's just like with using a Google service on the internet. It's on a desktop computer. It's a matter of you choosing if you like the service versus the.
But most people don't know how to do that. Most people don't know that they can go.
It is interesting, though. It is interesting.
And most people probably also don't care about anonymous data, though. If we're going to get
it's interesting in this day and age where everybody is clearly concerned about privacy, but then immediately go posts their location on Instagram, pops up something on Facebook, tweets with a location there about what they're doing, where they are, pictures of their dinner. It's not
people
exactly.
People are surveilling themselves these days.
People are handing this stuff over.
Yeah,
I mean, it's here.
Absolutely.
Whoever wants to mine this and sweep this up,
I agree.
Federal government, whatever. It's it's out there. So I do believe that Apple has clearly made a PR play for privacy. And
I don't know if it's just PR. I mean, they definitely did the whole PR thing for privacy.
But what I'm saying is they are actively touting that. I'm not saying it's just PR, but that they have done that as a selling point.
And it's a smart selling point because Google is known for utilizing data. So you can see why it makes sense.
I absolutely agree. And, the end-to-end encryption on iMessages, a lot of that stuff is, again, built into the operating system, the encryption stuff, the privacy stuff. And I think I'd rather have a company on my side saying, hey, you deserve privacy, and if you want, you can opt out of these things. You know what I mean? And for certain, like you can opt out, again, in Google, but not many people know that you can. Where Apple goes out of their way to make, let's say, a privacy document, their privacy policy, easy to read and easy to understand, where you read other companies and it's you need to be a lawyer. You need to be a lawyer to understand what you're getting into, and people don't. They don't have the time. They don't care. Or if they do
they
care,
just don't know.
or they don't know.
They just
right.
Don't know.
That's better than they don't.
I mean, 99% of people on anything check the OK box, whatever
or
it is.
Sign off on the EULA, and and they've given up all their rights
it's
to
like
whatever.
a car rental agreement. You just sign, you move on. No one's going to read all the fine print.
Okay, app stores. Okay. App stores. Who does a better job at app stores? Or to me, in my mind, I think they're roughly equivalent.
At this point,
at
Google
this point.
certainly had
it took a while for
Google had to build up because Apple had the advantage. In terms of I think there was a long time where there was a perception that something would come to Apple first, and it was a frustration among Android users. It was absolutely true.
Was it true? Is it not still true for most applications or many applications?
I think they're simultaneous.
I think it's pretty close. I mean, maybe it depends on how specific. And I'm not a big gamer. I know there are people who complain about games being that, but as far as like the big productivity tools, any major company, it's pretty close. I mean, occasionally you'll see Apple first, occasionally you'll see Android first, but basically in balance. I can't remember the last time I wanted to find something that was on, Apple that I couldn't find. And of course, you're going to find examples on either. And there are things that are available on Android that aren't on Apple.
Sure.
Quite likely, they just wouldn't make sense on one platform or the other.
Sure.
The actual real world problem of it being, I can't find this on my phone, I don't see as an issue nowadays. No. Have you found that data otherwise?
Yes.
Let's see what we've got.
Yes, Mr. Metrics. Do we have anything on that?
I'd be curious.
I didn't look into because again the thing
it's
with
hard to measure.
Right. The thing with applications is again it's proprietary to this system here, and then the next day that the developer released it for that platform too.
Sure.
So that's fine, but what I'm finding again in my research is that developers will generally develop for iOS first because iOS users spend more money.
Yeah,
they spend more money on their apps. It's that simple. I mean, you can.
Well, I mean, look at the
balance
subset of people you're talking about. If you can afford to buy a top-end iPhone, you likely have more money to spend.
Whereas there are so many budget-level Android. I mean, especially
Cereal Box.
Right, Cereal Box. And
the freebie.
If we go global out of the U.S., you've got a lot of very inexpensive Android phones, whereas Apple's never really targeted that market. So it's a whole different
demographic. Yeah, they've lowered their prices for the older hardware. But I mean, but the older hardware too was once high end, and which is why people don't mind buying the older hardware, and it's still supported. It's supported for years, and that's
supported to a degree. I mean, every release you see you read the fine print under the asterisk, and it's this device doesn't get feature XYZ. And
Sure.
And then I don't have firsthand experience, but you always see people complaining, "Hey, my 2-year-old iPhone got this upgrade, and now it doesn't work, and it's all janky." And is that a real
well, that was iOS 7, iOS 8, which was that was a major rewrite, and that took. I mean, even with the latest versions, even with the latest devices, that took forever for them to settle it down and make it responsive and not buggy. So I mean,
they received the software, but
you can't really do what you want to with it. Okay, so I'm going to say app stores is roughly equal. I don't really see a huge advantage either way there. I think you've made your points about the developers, at least in the old days, developing first for iOS. I think a developer, unless they're doing something Apple specific, if they're not developing for both platforms, then they're not doing something right. Speaking of things that Android does right, customization. How customizable is this?
You can turn off my mic for this.
Yeah,
I'm not going to need it.
The table is just turned.
I'm not going to need it.
Because I will say this. I mean, I am obviously an Apple guy, but I would really like to be able to do the kinds of things you can do with the operating system and UI and everything else that
before
you can do
take
on
it
Android
without
jailbreaking my phone.
Right. Before you take over this conversation, you can do Apple's loosening up in certain things. Like, for instance,
you can move your icons around and have different shapes on, the same shape here or there.
Right, absolutely. And you can put stuff in folders now.
Right. Yes.
So, absolutely.
I remember when that first came, I don't know which version it was when that was announced. That was a big punchline among Android users. Like, they've got folders.
Absolutely.
It's revolutionary.
But, Apple's made some changes to the OS, so you can have system-wide keyboards. You can change the widgets, modify some things.
But it's still exceptionally locked down compared to Android.
Your choices are storage and color.
Yes, right? Exactly. Yeah.
No, but to your point, it has come a long way. Because I remember there are things now with the keyboards that, just a few years ago, I think everybody would have said, Apple's never going to open the door to this. No one's ever going to do this. And little baby steps, but
what they do is they develop the APIs that are very secure that only allow for that. That then applications can then take advantage of, or developers writing applications can then take advantage of. Where Google will just release this, it's the Wild Wild West. Not Google will release, but third-party developers will release anything that can hijack the system, like modify, the system, again, like the keyboard, for instance.
I wouldn't call it hijacking to use a third-party keyboard.
Okay, so maybe I used the wrong word.
There are
Where is that in your statistics? I want to see that one.
Exactly.
It's not just that you can't just release a keyboard to the Google Play Store that
takes over your phone and does whatever you want to.
There are restrictions and APIs and guidelines.
Apple's more restrictive.
That is true. That is true.
So, no, I think clearly, Android. And I think, this is where that, the Wild West or the fragmentation is not an issue at all, because it really does allow you to sort of personalize the device the way you want it.
Sure. And it comes down to, everything from the hardware, which of course there's a personalization in the fact that you can choose
Of what you get.
what fits your
The variety
personal
of
needs.
phones, yeah.
Yeah, and then in the software, not only in for better or for worse, how manufacturers kind of put on their own flavors to it, but then what you can do, you can replace the home screen launcher with something that works in any number of interesting ways, and pretty much any component of the system, you can easily find a third-party alternative that.
And you can actually
works more.
download entire OSs and modify those, and then because Google supports the custom ROMs. That's not available on the Apple platform.
Right,
So-
right. You'd probably be in like warranty breaking terrain. That's
Yes.
more like kind of hackery. But yeah, I mean,
Right.
for people who are into that, there are a
Well,
lot
you
of
can jailbreak an
possibilities.
iPhone.
Yeah.
But you're going
Agreed.
to, in the same way. Do you spend a lot of time customizing when you get a new phone?
In-
Do you really go through,
Yeah,
visually
to-
and
to-
UI and...
To an extent, I've dabbled in
Because you
the
can,
past.
you
Yeah,
should.
yeah. In the
but,
past,
but
I've
you
dabbled
don't.
in the.
Once you've established a certain way the
certain
phone
look.
works,
Yeah.
that's what you leave it alone.
Yes and no. I
And-
kind of know what works for me, but I'm always also experimenting with new and
Sure.
interesting things. And
Sure.
part of that's my job,
Sure.
to learn about them. But in doing that, I'll find something that's like, hey, this makes
Right.
life a little easier, a
Agreed.
different way to do things.
Right.
Uh,
Apple definitely designs for a more umbrella.
Apple tells you what you want and then gives it to you.
Right. You've got
Essentially.
to.
Yeah.
Basically,
Yeah. That's
they
not. That's
decide-
not. That's not wrong.
Well, I know. They tell you what you want and they give it to you.
Right. And when somebody's looking at, if there's anybody who's still looking at which kind of phone do I want and doesn't have an opinion, the question is, do you like the way Apple does it? If you like the way Apple does it, great. If
Right.
you want anything different, then that's not going to work for you because it's, if it works for you, then it's spectacular and it's
Right.
easy and it does the trick. But if you want to do anything differently or want any kind of freedom to have flexibility there, then you're not going to get that in iOS.
That being said, though, it does cover a wide range of users, or in terms of Apple's audience or what they're targeting. So, so you have, again, those one or two devices that cover a wide.
I mean, the small, medium, large, good, better, best
Right.
options.
Yeah,
They
it has
cover-
gotten a
Essentially,
little overlapping
yeah,
with the
it has
hardware
the latest
lineup.
because they
Yeah.
have like 60 million iPhone
Right,
models.
which is another weird new twist,
It
unexpected
is.
twist
Yeah.
from Apple, not having the simple 1, 2, 3.
Their product
Right.
matrix is getting weird and
Yeah.
sort of like, trying to figure I still can't wait to see what the successor to the iPhone 10 is next
Right,
year.
right.
Was it
And
10.1?
the iPhone 8, is it the 9? Is
11?
it the,
Right.
which is just weird for Apple.
Yeah, yeah.
It
We
is.
talked about this one. The
Yeah.
King is good for me. The Mingus on text.
Call him
And-
Kingus.
I do.
Mingus.
I do. Just
Not
in front of
being
your face.
iPhone X is also weird. That is actually iPhone 10.
Well, OS 10. They have a history of that.
He
so.
said
Didn't you
iPhone
assume it was X,
10.
though?
I thought it was
You guys
X.
I
think
thought
it
it was
was
gonna be.
X?
I thought it was gonna be X.
I kind of
yeah.
like the X. It's
Yeah.
Well, so
iPhone
do
10,
people because everybody I know calls it OS X. You know what I mean? It's clearly been
X, yeah.
OS 10 since 2000.
Okay, and all right.
But we
and,
are digressing.
and our final category, contestants, would be innovation. Who's more innovative?
All right.
And prove it.
Let's see. Basically, with Apple, you get the hardware and the software teams working in concert. Apple makes their own chipsets. They make their own GPUs now. They make their own, technology.
Their chip
They're-
work is important. What
Right.
they're doing in chips is
because
really
because the
important.
processor they just released now with for the iPhone 8 and the iPhone 10, they were working that 3 years ago. They were working on that 3 years ago, and the hardware and software team, like the camera team, would say, "Hey, we need an ISP, a new image signal processor," and the silicone team would say, "Oh, we can put that right into our processors." So the hardware and software integration is amazing. Apple's not always the first to market though, so we know that, but they commit the necessary research time and into creating the quality products that are going to create a great user experience for a wide.
Well, that's the hardware software combo.
Right.
If you've got that,
but
it makes it much
but
easier
it
to do that.
lasts. It's not like I have a phone that I can use for another 5 or 6 years because it's supported and whatnot. I mean, there's that, but we're talking about stuff that impacts the industry. You know what I mean? I mean, let's go back. The Apple I was the first, a full computer where everything was being sold as kits. The Mac 1984 introduced the GUI and the mouse in a non-intimidating form factor. You have the PowerBook 500, which that had the first trackpad, the first Ethernet connection, the first stereo sound, and it was designed in a way that laptops are still aping that basic design. With
Well, I
the
mean, you
trackpad.
can just jump ahead. Look at the iPhone. The
I
first
mean-
iPhone is,
But what I'm saying is, it's that's what they do.
it's going to be hard for Google to compete with innovations that took place years
That's
before
true.
it was
That's
even
true.
around. But anyway.
Yeah, I don't think
Well, I
anyone
mean-
would.
But I get the point. The point is that Apple is an innovator,
and they
has
make
innovated.
long-lasting, industry changes, changes that they make products that change the industry, that alter literally the course of the industry. For instance, Microsoft.
The iPhone sure as hell did.
Right, and Microsoft had tablets for the last decade, since like 2000.
You mean those big clunky things that look like books with a screen attached?
But that's my point. Now every single tablet looks like a variant of the iPad. It's that simple. So Apple
has the cachet to set an industry standard.
Agreed.
And when Apple takes on something, there's no question that that's going to become the baseline expectation. That being said, they did a good job innovating wireless charging this time. They innovated the folders a while back. the kind of Android joke is that what are they going to innovate and magically create this
right.
one?
But
I don't know if you'd call that innovation as much as they do have the power and the authority to establish it. But when it comes to the actual innovation, most of the things that are pushing smartphones forward, I think there's an argument to be made that have been more since the early days. The early days Apple did, but since then have been more on the Android side. When you look at the phablet, as it were, that Apple or at least
which Apple was really late to the game on.
I think the larger screens were inevitable. I think Apple's trying
that
to
size was the perfect size, and then suddenly Apple followed.
Agreed, and it definitely happens, which is good because Apple can take a step back and kind of say, all right, this is where everybody's going now. Let's adjust, and then let's leapfrog that, which again has the Android makers scrambling, and then they try to leapfrog that, which creates a cycle that
everyone wins.
It's good for everybody.
Wins. Yeah.
Let's stop right there. Wait a minute. Everyone wins? Wait, we're not going to decide one's better than the other. They're both great.
Right.
In their own way.
God, absolutely consumers win and enterprise users win because it's within Android, you do have the competition, from one device maker to another. But then you have Apple that they say, wait, we have to be able to stand up to that, and we have to be able to convince people to buy our phone instead of their phone. So everybody's spurning along everybody else.
I think again, I'm an Apple guy. If for some reason Apple went away tomorrow and I had to use Android, I'd be fine. I would spend probably way too much time customizing it, but I'd be fine using it. It would do what I need to do. I'd worry a little bit about privacy, but I'd be dealing with it. If Android went away, I don't know. Would you be okay using an iPhone?
I mean, I think at this point, when I've used iOS devices, and I have an iPad, I try to
feel confining.
Yeah, exactly. I feel very confined, and I get frustrated. And when I'll support, one of my parents has an iPhone and an iPad, actually, and when I'll try to support something there is, why is everything so hard to find? And a lot of that's just what you're used to, and I think that's what it comes down to. And I think both operating systems have reached a point of maturity where, realistically, if any of us had to use the other, it'd be annoying for a while till you got used to it. It'd be fine. That probably wouldn't have been the case maybe 5-6 years ago, but now they're pretty mature.
Have you ever had a Mac user or an iOS user use another device? They get so frustrated.
But
that's the same thing, though. It's because you're not used to it.
But yeah.
I mean, give somebody who's used to an iMac, give them a Windows machine.
Right. Same on the desktop.
It's the same sort. It's even worse.
You got to lock
desktop.
all the windows. You got to close them. So they don't jump out of it. It's ridiculous.
Or vice versa. I mean, I don't love Windows, but I've used Windows forever. And when I try to use
nobody
a Mac,
loves Windows.
No one loves Windows. There's no one who does. But you accept it. But when I try to use a Mac, it's the same thing. It's just I can't find anything. This doesn't work the way I want. And I think a lot of that is just what you're used to and familiarity and all that.
Sure.
All right, so there you have it. The definitive this side, all sides, everybody wins debate about iOS and Android. I don't think we really resolved anything, but it actually really was helpful for me to hear from both of you guys why you use what you use, why you like it.
I'm disappointed we didn't come to blows.
Food for thought. Actually, there's some Oreos floating around. We're going to throw at each other later on.
Oh, fun.
We should do this every year. We'll just plan on doing this next year.
Sounds good.
For now, for JR over here and Mike over here, my experts, that's a wrap. Thanks.